Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. And for the first time in 3 years, Americans' wages are no longer outpacing inflation, according to data released today from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Gas is averaging $4.55 a gallon, and we will soon have a new Fed chair. Justin Wolfers is a University of Michigan professor of economics, and he returns to Lincoln Square today to talk about all of this and his new Substack, Platypus Economics. Professor, thank you so much for being here.
Mate, we can go with Justin instead of Professor. How's that?
Okay,
All right.
sounds good. So before we jump into the news of the day, I know you just launched on Substack, and I was wondering, I think we have a clip of that actually, Sean, from your first video.
Loved every minute I've spent teaching economics to university students. But I also know that too many people never get access to these ideas and they pay the price for it. And that's why I'm starting Platypus Economics. Because economic literacy isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And because everyone, not just the privileged few, deserves the tools to see the world clearly. Welcome to Platypus Economics.
So you teach college students, but you're opening this up to everyone. What's the response been?
Oh, it's been really good.
Yeah.
I've loved it. It turns out it's a bit of a surprise, actually, because when you get sat next to the economist at the dinner party, you're often asked to be resat next to the accountant instead. But look, I think we're at a moment where, first of all, I think lots of us have beautiful brains and like to have our neurons tickled. And, you know, from my side, I want to teach the world economics. And so the question is, that's the supply, where's the demand? And it turns out people love having their neurons tickled. But also, I think we're at a really interesting moment. It doesn't give me any great joy to say that the demand for economics might be high right now because there's a lot to be worried about. And knowledge is power. Understanding the vast impersonal forces that are shaping our lives, well, at least understanding them gives you it can salve that anxiety a little bit. People have been so nice. I'm used to people saying everyone on the internet is horrible. And
But that has not been the case for you.
oh, they've been charming. Maybe I've just grown a thick enough skin to forget all the people who say mean things.
Well, is there anything that you can say on your Substack that you wouldn't say, like in a New York Times column that you write?
Look, when I've written for the Times, they've actually always let me say what I wanted to say, but it has to be in just the right voice. It has to be written sort of that for a Brooklynite with a master's degree who goes to fancy dinner parties. And it has to be a snappy 800 words. There's two things I get to do, I think, differently on Substack and YouTube. One is be myself, a little bit less buttoned down. And another is go in the direction I want to go. I'm actually just about to release a video on Wednesday. I'm super excited by it, where I just sort of show you how economists do our work. And so that in itself isn't enough to make a Times column. But if we want to do economics in public, I think sort of just being open and showing you everything, you know. So, yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing. I'm the editor and the writer. I'm the publisher. No one can stop me.
So are you on a mission to prove that economics is not the dismal science?
Mate, I'm on a mission to teach the world economics. I think that economics is not a day in my life in which I haven't been grateful to have learned economics, where it hasn't helped me see the world more clearly and make better decisions. And when I think about all the ways people get screwed in their lives, often it comes back to bad decisions or people trying to screw them or failing to see the deeper truths that economics can make a little bit more obvious. If I want to succeed, though, at teaching the world economics, it's not enough that I write dry equations on a board. I do have to meet people where they are. And so there has to be the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. And so, yeah, economics can be fun. I've loved every day of being an economist. And Susan, if you haven't, it's because you've had the wrong teacher. It's a beautiful way of, it's a thing of, you know, seeing the world more clearly. What a joy.
Well, why don't we talk about the biggest news of the day, the new numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showing that U.S. inflation jumped to 3.8% in April. It is outpacing wage growth, bringing back some, I think, bad memories for a lot of us in that post-pandemic era. Um, Obviously, this is your area of expertise. Is this something you were expecting to see?
Um, you don't have to take too many economics classes to realize that if you raise tariffs and then start a war in the Middle East, which is the primary supplier of energy to the world and energy sold in world markets, it doesn't take a lot to realize that raises price pressures.
Mhm.
So, everyone's been talking about it for a couple of years. I want to point this to the silver lining here, which is what we're focusing on here when you say 3.8% inflation is the headline inflation number, which includes the price of energy. That headline is a very important answer to a very important question, which is what's happening to my cost of living.
Mhm.
If you're thinking about instead, what does the future of inflation look like? We tend to think that that's better described by looking at core inflation, which is quite a lot lower. Core inflation strips out food and energy. The reason it does that is food prices go up and down with things like droughts. Energy prices go up and down with things like wars in the Middle East. And they don't necessarily reflect the underlying inflationary momentum of the economy. And
Mhm.
so the bad news right now is that the cost of living has gone up. The good news is for these somewhat idiosyncratic reasons that have not yet become embedded into an inflationary psychology or an inflationary process.
So, because we've seen this spike, can we? What really accounts for this? Obviously, we have the war in Iran. We do still have tariffs on the books. What are the main causes that are driving this?
Yeah. So what we had was, let me go back and tell a few years of history. So we had COVID, and the COVID shock is basically, it's like when you unplug the Windows computer. We sort of unplugged the global economy, and you plug it back in,
Mm.
and it takes a long time to start back up again. And that's a specific form of a supply shock. I want to point out it happened in every country around the world in roughly equal measure. So as much as there's a lot of rhetoric around it being a Biden inflation, it really was a global reset as a result of the largest disruption to supply chains in yours or my lifetimes. Then that's a big blip, but that blip just falls out of the system, which is
Mm.
to say when prices go from low to high, that process is inflationary. When they stay high, that's not inflation. That's just high
Mhm.
prices. That's an important distinction. People often are worried about high prices and they talk about inflation or the other way around. The president, as he was running for office, did something deeply irresponsible. He didn't promise to get inflation down. He promised to get prices down,
Mm.
which he's fundamentally failed to do. No price is falling. I mean, not none, but the average price level is overwhelmingly higher than when he arrived. There's nothing he's done to bring the price level down. In fact, the single best way to bring the price level down would be by starting a recession. So the promise was irresponsible. Fortunately, he didn't follow through on it. Um, I don't know how often you can say that. So that's COVID. So the COVID inflation disappeared, and basically we were on track for, as that disappeared, inflation to come back down to normal. And it got down to about 3% round about the election, and we were just waiting for the last mile. Just think of the movement from 3% to 2%. I want to point out both 2 and 3 are pretty low, as
Mm.
in it's not an overwhelming part of my life. If you remember when it was 9%, it felt angrifying, which is a word I just made up. Um, we were on track for it to float back down.
Mhm.
President arrives, starts a trade war. And all of a sudden, when you tax other goods, turns out you make them more expensive.
Mhm.
The president, by the way, has spent a year and a half denying that. And then this week said, I want to respond to the cost of living crisis. I'm worried how expensive beef is, so I'm going to cut tariffs on beef,
Mhm.
which, by the way, is the most profound, most direct acknowledgement that they all knew all along that they were raising prices. Of course,
Yeah.
they knew that. The whole point of tariffs is to raise prices. If you don't raise prices for foreign goods, you don't create extra demand for domestic goods.
Mhm.
So that's been a big part. So that's been a big part of the story over the past year and a half. Now I'm going to bore you even more. Sorry, Susan. I just get excited about this. There was a period through 2025 where I'd go on shows like this and people would say, well, inflation's not that high yet. And the reason for that is they instituted tariffs and then they immediately turned them off. If you remember Liberation Day, 7 days later, we got unliberated again. And then we went and did 0 out of 90 deals in 90 days. And then the president gave himself a bit more time. And then he had a nap and then he woke up and he redid the tariffs. And so actually the tariffs are moderately new. And so they've now been feeding inflation through late 25 and early 26. And those inflationary pressures were still there, but we're hoping they'd start to fade out. And then we decided if you were elected on a platform of bringing down prices on day one, the first thing you do is bomb a run, forcing up energy prices. Sorry, this is America, and I have to be clear when I'm being sarcastic. So you shouldn't bomb a run if you want to bring down energy prices. Let me get that clear.
Wish we had known that 10 weeks ago.
I blame sarcasm for the situation we're in.
So if you listen to the president, he tells you every day that the economy is great, gas prices are falling. If you look on the internet, you would think that we're in another Great Depression. Where are we really at with the economy?
Yeah, I hate giving letter grades because they mean different things to people from different generations. So when I was in college, getting a B was pretty good. There's been so much grade inflation. If my kids get a B, I don't talk to them. No, I do talk to them, but I send them to their room. But I think the economy's a B right now in a grade inflated world. So fortunately, unemployment had been rising for the first part of the Trump administration. It feels like it's leveled out. Inflation is well above the Fed's target, and we were in the middle of a supply shock and a war, as well as the middle of a trade war. The budget deficit, no one talks about this, but the budget deficit is at a level that would only make sense if we were in a profound recession. It's been an absolutely irresponsible cash splash, much of it to the rich. So I would want a better return on the fiscal dollars that we're spending right now. I think arguably, the B is a complicated letter grade here. If you asked how people were feeling, you'd go closer to B minus. If you looked at the hard statistics, you'd go closer to B plus. Part of it is, as you look forward, we feel more reasons to be a little bit anxious or a lot anxious than maybe we're seeing in the numbers so far. I think the other thing, though, is what's different. So when a global pandemic shut down the world economy, I understood it was biology destroying the economy. The biggest economic shocks the United States is facing right now come from the White House. And so grading economic policy and grading the economy might be slightly different things. Grading the economy, maybe we're in B land. Grading economic policy, you've started a trade war that you appear to have gotten bored with halfway through and walked off, like literally just fallen asleep in front of the television. And then woke up with a start, bombed Iran, closed the Strait of Hormuz, which has bigger implications for the rest of the world than it does here, but still huge implications here. And once again, appears to have fallen asleep in front of the television.
I've noticed that that's a theme for you. You keep talking about the president falling asleep.
I don't think it's about my obsessions with sleep. It's about his obsessions with not following through. I don't think the statement's about me, mate. Look, let me just be clear with the audience about where we are with the trade war, because it's utterly bizarre. So he has Liberation Day, then he calls it off, then he puts it back on. Then we go through the next year, and by the way, everyone understands it's probably illegal. The Supreme Court knocks it down. The next day he says, well, I'm going to put in place a temporary 150-day tariff because he's using a different legal authority. This legal authority only allows a temporary tariff of up to 15%. The next day, he says 10%, just kidding, 15%. Never takes that back, but actually, so no one knows what the tariff rate is. And I'm not joking. The president literally announced 2 tariff rates. Turns out they've implemented 10%. That's what they'll charge you at the border. But you wouldn't know that by listening to the president. This is a temporary tariff for up to 150 days that has also since been ruled unconstitutional. We don't know what the next tariff regime is. He hasn't said, you know what, I got it wrong. Maybe we should go to Congress and sort out what the Constitution says, or
Right.
this is a bad idea, or this isn't working out. He's just tariffing
Yeah.
in a temporary way, with no recognition that most of those 150 days are gone and it's already unconstitutional and none of us know. Like, as far as I can tell, literally got bored and walked off the soccer pitch. I've seen under sixes play soccer with a stronger sense of focus and follow through. And then where are we in Iran? The strait is closed. The global economy is hurting. The Iranians have nukes. They have an Ayatollah Khomeini. If that's the best we can get, then get out with a sense of urgency.
So the Supreme Court made it clear to the president that all he needs to do is go to Congress if he wants his tariff policy. He has a Republican Congress, but he has decided not to go that route, which would at least give us some clarity about what the rate is. Do you think that he will be doing this at any point, or are we still kind of bobbing and weaving along?
You make a really, really fundamentally important point, Susan. I just want to just double down on it, which is every time the court have ruled against the president, he's whined and he's hollered and he's cried and he's sooked and he said, this is terrible for America that I can't set tariffs. He can. He just needs Congress. So to be clear, the only thing the president's upset about is he can't unilaterally do it, which, by the way, is not a very Republican, republic being the opposite of a monarchy, way of thinking about the world. Those of us who are used to thinking in terms of democracies don't think it's that unusual to have to win over elected representatives to get a policy. So the president hasn't gone to Congress, I think, for basically two reasons. One, that would require doing some hard work. And two, the policies are dumb. They're so dumb that even a Republican Congress is not going to go along with them. So he would lose the war of ideas. And because of that, he doesn't fight it. He doesn't play it. And so we have unconstitutional tariff, 2 rounds of unconstitutional tariffs, and the president looking to use tariff powers in ways that may turn out to be constitutional, but certainly weren't the way the framers of the Constitution would have envisioned.
Let's talk about the deficit, because that used to be a Republican priority, at least before Donald Trump was president. This is not even an issue that is making the news on a regular basis, but you're raising some really important red flags. What does this mean in the short term and the long term?
Yeah. So I just want to get the facts out there for people because it's easy to lose track of this. So what's happened is we've sort of slowly ramped stuff up in a way that no one's noticed what's going on. So one way of thinking about this, Susan, my guess is 10 years ago, you and I had never used the word trillion. Just never used it. There was no point. There's no trillions of anything. There's no trillions of dollars, trillions of people, unless you're studying stars, maybe. And the global financial crisis in 2008 led to a fairly strong fiscal reaction, but it was one measured in hundreds of billions. Then we got to Trump tax cuts and we got to the pandemic, and the response was suddenly measured in trillions. And after the pandemic, I think, demanded a strong fiscal response. I think the reason that my local dry cleaner is still alive, the reason the economy bounced back within a couple of years rather than a couple of decades, is partly because of that. But you could disagree. That's fine. What you can't, I think, is indefensible, is to say that the current moment demands the level of spending we have. The deficit right now, so we had those 2 enormous moments, the 2008 financial crisis and the pandemic. If you took them out of the equation, the deficit right now is basically at the highest level it's ever been. I mean, and World War II. have to get World War II out of there, right? But like, it's at a level that past administrations wouldn't have gone to in a moment of dire need. So maybe you think we're in a moment of dire need, in which case let's have an honest conversation about it and let's run an honest fiscal policy. Or maybe you keep the news cycle so full of nonsense and garbage that nobody notices you're running a 5.8% of GDP deficit, which in no sense is sustainable. Okay, now let me unwind. What does that mean in the short run? In the short run, if the US is borrowing a lot of money, they're competing with you when you want to borrow money to buy a house. So the interest rates go up. That's the most immediate thing. In the longer run, that remains a very, very important factor. The other thing is you actually get to the point where the level of debt that we've accumulated becomes so high that the US economy becomes quite vulnerable. Let me explain. Actually, great that you've got that 100% of GDP milestone. So the level of debt in the United States just crossed 100% of GDP, which it hasn't done since World War II. Some people, 100% sounds like a magic number. There's nothing magic about it. It's just saying 1 year's production, so 365 days of production, that's how big our debt is. Fair enough. That puts us not as the highest industrialized country in the world, but not far off. Japan's at 136%. It's among the highest points it's ever been in our past. At one level, there's a direct problem. I don't like being deeply in debt because then I'll have to repay the money, or the way we'd say it in fiscal terms is our children inherit the debt. Now, the flip side is our children are going to inherit a wonderful world, hopefully, and we've given them easier and better, richer, fuller lives than was given to our grandparents. And so maybe you don't worry about that. But I think you need to worry about vulnerability to a fiscal crisis. Let me now explain what that is. I'm sorry if I sound like a textbook. When I do
Not at
that,
all.
stop me. I ate a textbook for breakfast this morning. Sorry. So at the moment, our debt is high, but everyone believes we can repay it. Because they believe we can repay it, they charge us low interest rates. Because the interest rates are low, our monthly payments are low, and therefore we can repay it. So this is a virtuous circle in which our ability to repay leads to low interest rates, which leads to low payments, which makes it easy to repay. Fantastic. Let me tell you a lesson that countries like Argentina learned. If suddenly the world wakes up and says, I'm worried you can't pay, then what they'll do is they'll jack up the interest rate. Well, if you jack up the interest rate, now you just jacked up my monthly payment. If you've jacked up my monthly payment, maybe I can't pay it, in which case they were right to raise the interest rate. And that's what's called a fiscal crisis. Now, the thing I want you to notice about that vicious cycle is it's only really vicious if you have a lot of debt. Because if you have a small amount of debt, if they raise the interest rate, but you don't owe a lot of money, your monthly payment wasn't very big anyway. So if you double a tiny monthly payment, you can still make it. But if you double a huge monthly payment, you're in trouble. The bigger our debt gets, the more vulnerable we become to something like that. I want to be clear. I'm not coming out and saying Economist says fiscal crisis is just around the corner. But I am saying it becomes more possible the more we walk down this road. Susan, can I give another third answer?
Yes.
Just have a third one I really want to give. What we've seen is Reagan blew out the deficit, and then Democrats repaired it. And then Bush blew out the deficit, and then Democrats repaired it. And then Trump blew out the deficit. Biden didn't repair it, but he held back a little bit. It could have been worse. And the question
that was also post-COVID, as we've talked about.
Yeah. The logic of this, I think, actually makes great political sense, which is Republicans used to be fiscally conservative. They're not. Just literally not. If you want to be fiscally conservative, don't vote for a Republican. Not in the last 50 years. But there is a logic to what they're doing. It's not the logic of fiscal conservatism. It's if I spend all the money, there's no money for my opponent to spend when they're president. So now here's what's difficult, and I think fundamentally risks breaking a lot. If the next Democratic president were to call me and say, Justin, the debt to GDP ratio is really high. We owe a lot of money. The deficit's large. What should we do? Is the advice that I give clean up because you're the adults in the room, or play the same game they're playing, spend as much as you want and leave it for them to clean up?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of talk now that Democrats don't need to be the only adults in national politics. And if that's the case, then we move from a system with one set of fools to a system with two sets of fools. And that terrifies me. But equally, I don't know how to call my Democratic friends and say, you should keep batting clean up behind these guys.
Right. And especially because a lot of core Democratic priorities have been cut, even though we've been spending, because we've spent a lot of money in Iran and we've spent a lot of money on tax cuts that have disproportionately gone to the 0.01%. And as a result, we're still cutting programs like SNAP and healthcare subsidies, things that Democrats, if they get back in power, would very much like to spend more money on. And where do you fall in that? Because there are positive economic impacts of trying to strengthen some parts of the safety net that have been cut, but at the same time, there's the overall economy to worry about and the deficit.
Right. And so the issue that I was just describing is actually less economics and more politics, right? So we're in this, if I were asked for my view and the next Republican administration is going to be like the last one, then I would learn that every dollar we sock away is going to be spent irresponsibly by the next set of Republicans on tax cuts for the rich. Then I don't want to be fiscally conservative anymore. The net effect is not fiscal conservatism. The net effect is irresponsible spending by the other side, which means that we're going to be in this game of chicken. And I don't know how to stop the car. I really don't. And Susan, like, I'm an economist who worries about fiscal sustainability. Yet still, it's not obvious that I should give the advice to the next Democratic administration to be fiscally responsible. I don't see how I can do that and just let the other side get all the spending for its priorities.
It's a really sobering thought. I wanted to talk to you since you brought up interest rates.
Can I just pause on that point? I want to be sunny and optimistic now.
Okay, we'll do our best.
Here's what we need.
Okay.
A general public that knows and understands and cares about fiscal issues. If it does, that changes the electoral calculus. And then both sides have an incentive to be grown-ups. And so that, let's talk about economics. I love what you're doing here, right? Because if we do that, that's the only way out of that mess.
Do you think people want to get more fiscal knowledge, or, because right now, I would say the last few years, the dominant theme that I get, whether I'm talking to voters or spending time online, is the vibe session. And this was under Biden. It's also under Trump.
Yep.
And it's a real doomer perspective that prices have never been higher. It's never been harder to make in the economy. And while that certainly is true for some people, you gave the economy a B. I mean, during the Great Depression, the economy was not a B. So is there, obviously you found an audience, you're breaking through to some people, but is that desire for people to really become fiscally knowledgeable, is that out there?
I think you're sort of saying when you're at a dinner party and you start talking about fiscal responsibility, people sort of look to the other side. And
it used to be when I would talk about politics. Now, unfortunately, everybody wants to talk about it.
Yeah. Look, I've had that experience. On the flip side, I know people deeply care about their country. They deeply want their kids to inherit a world that's better. And that's what we're talking about. in very human terms, right? We can make it boring, debt to GDP ratios, blah, blah, blah. But it's, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
I also want to remind you, this is the optimist. Remember, you can tell me, what year did Perot run?
92.
In 1992, 20% of Americans voted for a single issue candidate who was about moving us in a more fiscally responsible direction.
Right.
So there are ways of telling these stories. Maybe what we need is those big Perot flip charts. That'd be terrific, wouldn't it?
The 30-minute infomercials, we'll go back to those days.
I tell you what, if Ross Perot wants to fund you and I, we'll do them together, Rachel. Susan, don't you think that'd be great?
It would be a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. So look, we'll do it. We'll get, maybe, I'm sure you have a lot of billionaire funders watching right now.
If you're out there, please call me and contact either of us.
Yes, that's right. So look, all that tells you is there is a latent demand for giving a shit. And we also know that people in other countries care. I also happen to agree with you at the risk of just sounding horribly naive. The current moment leads too many of us too often to see the world through partisan eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so important issues get left in the dust for partisan nonsense. The deficit's one of them. But also when you were talking about the vibe session was basically during Biden, Republicans were so convinced that everything that the president was doing was turning the economy to dust that they convinced themselves, despite reality, everything sucked. And if you look right now, I'm not going to let Democrats off the hook here. If you look right now at the University of Michigan measure of consumer sentiment, it's at the lowest level it's ever been. There's no way the American economy is as bad as it's ever been right now. And so what that means is Democrats are looking around themselves and they're saying, this is terrible. Even when reality is, I wish it were better. And again, maybe it's useful to draw the distinction. I think without doubt, and I seriously am not trying to be partisan when I say this, I think we've had the worst quality of economic policy in this presidency in any part of history that I can remember. So let me just say in my lifetime, maybe there was some really old presidents that were worse. You might know more about America than me. Were there?
Fiscally, maybe Calvin Coolidge?
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you, am I? I didn't go to school here, so I didn't learn a lot about Cal. The quality of economic advice that this team gives is the worst of any industrialized country I've ever seen. The qualities required to serve in this cabinet or to take a senior position appear to have very little to do with the ability to create policies that would be better for the American people, which would require things like humility, commitment to the data, deep understanding of the subject matter, and have a lot more to do with the president's personal interests. So are people mad about that? Yes. Should they be? Yes. But then back to your point, that's not the same thing as saying the economy is terrible. In fact, let me be radical for a moment, because I like to both tell the truth and upset people sometimes. This year will be the richest year in the richest country in the history of humanity. No one has ever had it as good, ever. And we should wake up and remind ourselves of that. It doesn't end policy debates, because the whole point of a policy debate is to say, but could we be better? And I think we could. And I think it's a travesty that we're not. But what an amazing world we live in right now.
And yet the president's approval rating is at negative 70% on the economy. He's never had numbers that low, not in his first administration, even though, COVID hit for the last year of his first presidency. How much of this really seems to be driven by gas prices? Because that's just such a tangible thing for people to see. You have to fill up your tank every few days, every week. You see it, it makes you angry. Is it really that simple, that gas is just a lot more expensive now than it was before we went to war in Iran?
So Susan, great news. I just got an electric car. My gas bill's zero. It's glorious. Love it. and I have a bike. Okay. Look, there is a literature looking at this, and it tends to find that consumer sentiment moves very, very closely with gas prices. And at one level, it makes a lot of sense, which is it's the only price in the economy that is literally 6 feet tall and that you see once a week. Now, if we went past 6-foot tall signs describing the price of our health insurance, and we had to pull into a health insurance station once a week, believe me, you would be pissed. It's a much bigger chunk of your income for most people. So there is a literature that does say gas prices really matter. I've never found it fully convincing because it seems to suggest the American people are fools, that the only price they're capable of looking at is the price of gas. I don't think they're fools. So I think it's probably fair to say it's more salient than most prices, but at a deep level, not the whole game. And I think this matters. I have personally been dismayed. The US went to war in Iran. I have done 30 TV hits, and 28 of them would have said, "What do you think this means for gas prices?" War's kind of a big deal. What does it mean for my heart? What does it mean for our morality? What does it mean for our place in the world? And even just beyond gas prices, what does it mean for the Fed? What does it mean for the stock market? We've been programmed as if the only thing Americans care about is gas prices. And I don't know if it's true, but I'm going to choose to believe it's not true.
Well, Justin, let's talk about the housing market because I feel like that's another issue that has kind of taken the back seat, especially with gas prices, for instance. We do have interest rates. I think they're around 6.5%. Certainly, they've been higher in the 80s. They topped 10%. So we've had it worse, but this is not the time of the 3% mortgage that a lot of people were fortunate to get. And we do have rising foreclosures. So what should we be looking at there? And what do you think we can reasonably expect in the coming years?
Yeah. So look, what do we need to build houses? We need to borrow a lot of money. So the interest rate really matters. Well, it's gone up. And one of the reasons it's gone up is the budget deficit. Another reason it's gone up is because of inflation as well. And the ongoing supply shocks that have kept Fed policy tighter than they otherwise would have been. Second thing you need is a whole bunch of materials. You need wood and tiles and bricks and
Labor.
I said materials. We're going to get to labor. See, what do you call the wall stuff? The stuff you make walls out of? Plasterboard? Drywall. Thank you. You can tell I've hung a lot of drywall. So drywall, a lot of that stuff's imported, and it's imported and paying tariffs. And depending on your house, you might need steel and aluminum as well, which have 50% tariffs. Wood from Canada is expensive. Drywall from Mexico got more expensive because of the tariffs. And then the third thing you need is labor. And historically, the construction industry's used a lot of immigrant labor, and they've been robustly discouraged from being engaged in that labor market. Apologies for the euphemism. Many people have been deported. Others have been threatened. They've seen the writing on the wall. They've been told there's no economic future for you here. So if you wonder why housing's expensive, the three things you need have had three major policy shocks. And then if you needed a little bit of energy to get everything done as well, don't worry, we just bombed Iran as well. So yeah, that's a big problem. There's a lot of talk in economics now. We like to talk about the solution is supply-based, not demand-based. The first thing I want to point out is if you're thinking about that, I'll say more about that in a moment, but if you think about supply, that is actually about the costs. So it is about the materials and the labor. The second thing is, what do we mean by that? Housing prices are really punishingly high in many cities, and they keep young people out of the market. One set of policies that's often very popular is you'll have something like a first-time home buyer's credit. Mm-hmm. Well, imagine the problem is there's a house for sale in your neighborhood and there's an auction. That first-time home buyer's credit just means more people will attend the auction. It's going to jack up the price. It does the opposite of what we want. So what we need is not more people turning up on the front yard. We need more front yards. Or we need more housing. And so this is an insight. First of all, it's obvious to economics. Secondly, actually came out of the libertarian economists who are like, well, there's all these restrictions. It's very hard to build houses. Local governments get in the way. State governments get in the way. Environmental regulations get in the way. Boom, 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 boom. And then more recently, that view has been co-opted by folks on the left, the so-called abundance movement,
Right.
where it's liberals admitting the reality that supply matters as well as demand. I think it doesn't matter which team's pushing it. The point's true. If you want lower house prices, the easiest way to do that is build more houses.
Right. Can you talk with us about what you see for the AI economy? Because we get a lot of doomerism there. We also have perhaps very unlikable figureheads at some of these companies that don't make us necessarily that sympathetic to the push for AI. But regardless, it's here. It will be a part of our economy. What does that mean in terms of jobs and the investment in this? And do you see that the federal government at some point may bail out this industry? Because some of these companies seem to not be as stable as perhaps they looked a couple of years ago.
Okay. Let me try and set the scene first. I've been an economist for a while. This is the most interesting disruption of my lifetime. I am a labor economist, and I think the world will be enormously different. I think the set of issues involved, it will transform our lives. It is already. Some might say that sounds like boosterism. I think, I spend a lot of time on this stuff. I think it's just a reality. If I think about my own career, what am I good at? I read widely, understand most of introductory economics, and am able to transform it into simple English. What does a large language model do? Reads widely, understands most of it, and transforms it into simple English. So,
But do they do it accurately?
Increasingly, yes. I understand the critique, but the reality is people make mistakes too. And so would I trust an LLM versus a talking head? Got to tell you, those talking heads are kind of relentlessly wrong, and often for partisan reasons, and sometimes they're poorly educated. Remember, everyone you see on TV is there as a result of a 32-year-old booking producer being impressed by them.
Or in my case, there's nobody else to ask questions.
Hey, we're not on TV. We don't count. We're new media. We're here on merits.
Yeah.
Your audience came to you. So I just want to point out, I think this I personally feel like a Detroit auto worker in the 1970s. And I think a lot of other white-collar workers should feel the same way. And that's before we get to any of the broader political questions, which is what happens in a world in which there are 3 AI companies that own all the world's compute? And what happens if we get down to 1? And who gets all the profits, and so on and so forth. Inequality could be transformed into something that it's not hard to tell stories where inequality is dramatically different, where economic life is different, where social life is different. In which case, the most obvious implication is that this is the most important policy debate of our lifetimes. In which case, my disappointment with this president is that we're talking about ballrooms and not stuff that matters. And I am totally serious about that the greatest failing is to stand there watching society move under your feet and doing nothing with no awareness, no intention, no strategy, and no policy. The administration has seen AI as being a war or a race between us and China. I think that the intellectual foundation of that is very weak. And then it is said, so therefore the best answer is laissez-faire, which means our entire regulation around AI has been, go on, have fun. like they're not even under pressure to not break too many things.
Right.
It looks like it might change, but I think the extent of the policy error of not being all over this
Mm-hmm.
can't be understated. So that's sort of, point number one. Let me try and give you two reactions to AI. So, and partly this reflects my own thinking. So, I'm an economist. If I learn that an AI can do half my job for me, then I'm like, this is fantastic. It means I can get twice as much done. I can produce twice as much. And if I can produce twice as much, I can consume twice as much, which is the future is going to be the land of milk and honey. That white collar work will be done effortlessly by machines. And so if the work's still getting done
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have to start till midnight to do it, that sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very natural frame for an economist. And that's why I'm an optimist about it. Now, I then spend some time talking to my kids. Or let me wear my dad hat. My daughter is 16. She's about to go to college in a couple of years' time. And she'll come at some point. No, she probably won't. But other kids come to me and they say, hey, what should I study in college? And my economist brain is good enough that I can say, well, I think there's no more work for translators because of AI. Don't study that. And I'm really worried about what's going to happen to coders. So let's stay away from computer science. And then they say, okay, well, then what should I study? And then I say, I don't know.
Mm.
I have a PhD in economics and wrote my thesis on labor economics. I don't know.
Okay.
And
my youngest is a history major. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm really glad you have children. Look, I don't know for your kids either. I'm not holding out for mine. I just don't know. But that gets to, I think I find it's taken me so long sometimes it takes me a long time to be a real human. I was so excited by this efficiency gain. I didn't see the following, which is there is going to be immense disruption between here and there. Huge. And that disruption will hurt a lot of people and it will help a lot. Most of our discussion, I think, is a little bit too negative because we talk a lot about the people it'll hurt and not that much about the upside. Fair enough. But for all of us, we don't know if we're going to be hurt and how much. And a very natural question is, you know what? I didn't ask for this. I was just living my life, raising my kids, going to work. And now everything's up in the air. Honestly, it took me a long time to figure this out, but I'd be pissed. So for people who are pissed, even an economist can see you now. But I do want to, I think reflexively being pissed is pointless. I think, first of all, the technology's here. Companies are going to use it. It is going to be part of your life. Secondly, I think the opportunity here is in fact immense. So our brains are very, very good at thinking about how other things can be substitutes.
Mm-hmm.
Can the robot do what I can do?
Mm-hmm.
So there's two words in economics. One is substitute. The other word is complement, right? So peanut butter and jelly are complements. They go well together. Peanut butter and Vegemite are substitutes. You'll either have one on your toast or the other. Most of us, most of the time, find it very easy to see the case for substitutes, in which case we're worried there's a robot that's going to take my job. But in reality, often new technologies turn out to be complements. They're a superpower. They're a cape you can tie around your neck and do whatever it is that you do and love doing and are good at doing even better. So I think we're a little too quick to see the downside. But I also understand that's not a fully fleshed out argument.
What are the potential goods here for humanity? In a best case scenario, what do you see with this new technology that could really help us, not just with the economy, but just, for humanity as a whole?
Yeah. So first of all, there's no difference between what's good for humanity and the economy. The economy is people. But I know you know that. Okay, the upside's vast. Let me give you a really simple thought experiment, which is how I like to think about it. Susan, your job, I'm sure, involves some number of frustrating, annoying things and some number of fun things and so on. If for your birthday I gave you a robot that can do any part of your job that you want it to, your life's going to be better, right? Of the 30 hours a week you spend doing annoying things, which includes unloading the dishwasher, it includes submitting reimbursement reports, it includes writing delicate emails to staff who are underperforming, it includes all the annoying things, right?
Mhm.
If I give you that robot, then you can either spend that 30 hours a week doing the parts of your job you love, or go to the beach, or write
I
poetry.
mean, we're in Michigan, so we have about 6 weeks for that, but
Yeah,
nonetheless.
well, you can go to the beach, it'll just be cold. You could write poetry. You could attend Michigan football games, and I hope you cheer for the right Michigan team. Do you have an admission to make?
I am the mother of 2 Spartans.
This interview's over.
I knew it had to end at some point. We're not about football.
Yeah. Okay, but if you get this robot, like, do you see I just described a version where you can get to use this technology that would enrich your life enormously? You could spend more time with your Spartans, maybe get them into Michigan next time. Sorry about that. So that's a version where it's literally utopian. Let me now give you a different version. I'm going to take the same robot, but I'm going to give it to your boss. Now, you don't have the boss because you're the executive editor, but if you had a real job, a normal job, you'd have a boss, right? And if I gave the robot to your boss, the boss would now say, Susan, I can get your job done for free.
Mhm.
You're fired. And all of a sudden now your boss is richer, but you're penniless.
Right.
The two scenarios, by the way, are technologically the same. They both involve a robot, in this case, AI. The only thing that's different is the ownership structure. So I think there's two things to draw from this story. One, there are ways in which this works out really well, right? The fact that you and I don't have to go to the bathroom outside or grow our own food, which sounds fun, but is actually kind of annoying when it's all the food you eat.
Right.
These are amazing marks of progress.
Right.
And we might come to see submitting reimbursement requests as being something also equally terrible, and we eliminate that from our lives. The other possibility, though, is all that work gets done by the robot, the boss gets richer, and eventually all of GDP is owned by the boss. You and I barely have enough food to get by, literally. And that's dystopia. So it's all on the table right now. And that's why I say this is the most important debate of our lifetimes. Now, you asked, either way, the cake gets bigger, the pie gets bigger, our economic pie gets bigger. The question is just what happens to your slice? You asked, though, when we start to think about the ways in which the pie could get bigger, then we can go back to being excited about it, which is I use a lot of AI in economics research, so we might learn better about how to run an economy.
Mm-hmm.
We have scientists using it in vaccine research or disease research or cancer research, and I know 1 million people are going to tell me it can't be a useful scientist, but actually the scientists doing this stuff disagree completely, and they expect to be enormously more productive as a result. So there are all sorts of objects of great usefulness and beauty that it can urge us towards. And the question is whether those who have are going to share with the rest of us.
Justin, before we let you go, I did want to ask you, because we are on the cusp of having a new Fed Chair, Kevin Warsh. Obviously, the current Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, is not the president's favorite person. He's repeatedly pressured him to try and lower interest rates. What do you see happening with the Fed under this new chair that clearly seems to be more aligned with the White House's vision for the economy?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides of this, and I'll try and be brief. The first thing is, Historically, Fed chairs have been very powerful, but they've earned that power. It's been an earned respect. And they've done that by making very strong, very coherent arguments. One of the things I think, should be very grateful for in the United States is our public debate over economics is vibrant. And so if Warsh would have come forward with stupid ideas, his colleagues would read about it on the pages of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Economist and the Financial Times every day for the next month. It wouldn't be a secret these are bad ideas. He's only one member of a committee, nothing would change. That's one. So if he tries to destroy the institution, I think he'll fail. A different answer is it's not clear who Kevin Warsh is. So you said he's clearly more aligned with the White House, and the White House wants very low interest rates. Kevin Warsh was also a member of the Board of Governors from 2006 to 2011, which was a period in which, the lead up to the financial crisis and then this long, slow recovery. And if you look through the recovery period, it was a period in which inflation was too low and unemployment was too high.
Right.
Where if the Fed made an error, and I think it did, its error was that it kept interest rates too high for too long and did too little to help the economy. Throughout that entire period, Warsh was the most vocal about worrying that inflation was too high, and he didn't really worry that much about unemployment. And he was the most vocal at suggesting that maybe we didn't need monetary stimulus. And he was what economists often call an inflation hawk, which is literally the opposite of what the president wants.
Right.
The question is, who is Kevin Warsh? And I think the truth is no one knows. I don't know if Kevin Warsh knows.
Justin, thank you for taking so much time, even though you took a potshot at my kids' alma mater.
Your kids are amazing. I love your kids. I just think they could be, if they took Economics 101 at Michigan, I would have a chance to meet them.
What a lovely save. You're so charming. I can see why people like learning economics from you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate all of your time.
All right, mate. Take care.